Let's move on to the fun part, querying our database. And luckily, Laravel and its component Eloquent make this all a breeze. I promise you're going to love it. Let's start from scratch. Laravel, new. We'll just call it project. I will then cd in there and open it in my editor, Sublime Text. Now, before we talk about Eloquent, let's just do a quick recap. You've learned that you register routes within your routes/web.php file. This is what you get out of the box. You've also learned that within the app HTTP directory, you can store any number of controllers. And further, you can generate new controllers by saying PHP artisan make controller. Finally, you've learned that within your resources directory, here you can store any pre-compiled JavaScript, any Sass or Less or generic vanilla CSS, and you can also store your views. So that means you have your routing layer, your controller layer, and your view layer. Let's move on to the model layer. So this is where we will register Eloquent models that represent a row within the database. And you'll find that most Laravel projects follow this format. This is called the active record pattern. But still, you are not limited to it. So you do have the flexibility to choose any system or pattern that you like. Anyways, to start, I'm going to show you a new file here, .env. So this file represents all of your configuration and private details. So this could be private API keys. It could be your database password. It could be the session or the queue driver or the cache driver you want to use. Don't worry about those just yet. We haven't discussed them, but I promise you we will. And we also have information for how you want to send and configure mail. Lots of options here. If we're going to connect to our database, I'll come up right here. So what we can see is we want our default database connection to be MySQL. We're going to connect to localhost on port 3306. And now here, this information, of course, all of it, but this specifically is configurable. What database are we connecting to? Well, let's set one up. Now you can do this manually through the console, or I use an app called SQL Pro. You can pull in phpMyAdmin, whatever you like. Okay, so in SQL Pro, I'm going to set up a localhost connection. The host is localhost, and it'll update that for me. The username, this just depends upon how you configured your database. And again, this is a bit of a prerequisite for this series. So if you don't know how to connect to a database, you might want to hit pause and watch some general PHP and MySQL lessons first. Anyways, on my system, the username is root and the password is nothing. There is no password. So I will connect. And now database, I'm going to add a database called tutorial, and we're all set to go. So let's reference that information. The database was tutorial, the username is root, and my password is an empty string, nothing. We now have everything we need to connect to the database. Now, what's the deal though? We store these items, these variables here, but how are they referenced in our application? Well, take a look at this config directory. You'll find a configuration file for most relevant components in your project. And of course, we have one for database. So we can see here the default database is going to read your environment file. And specifically, it's going to read whatever you have stored for database connection. And if it can't find anything, it's going to use this second argument here. So this says the default database driver will be whatever is stored for DB connection or MySQL. So let's take a look. We switch back. That is referenced here, and it happens to be MySQL as well. But we could use SQLite. There's a number of drivers that you can refer to. Okay, so if we scroll down, here's your options. SQLite, MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, lots of things that should fit your needs. So if we take a look at the MySQL configuration details, notice things like this. The database we're connecting to, just read that environment file for DB database, and the username and the password. All of that information is being stored here. Okay, great. So now I'm going to run a new artisan command, PHP artisan migrate. This is a new concept. Very likely, if you're new to a framework, this is going to be a new concept to you. In Laravel, we represent all of our tables and our alterations to these tables as classes. As we move on, you'll learn a number of benefits to this approach. But if nothing else, it allows you to quickly define the schema for a table without having to learn a whole new language. You can learn a basic API that Laravel provides you through its Blueprint class, and then you can quickly get up and running. And then if you have a team member who also wants to try out their project, they can clone it in, they can run this migrate command, and it will instantly filter through all of your migration classes and execute them. So in this case, we can see we created a users table and we created a password resets table. And as it turns out, this is what's included with Laravel by default. Okay, so if I head back to my database manager, I'm going to hit refresh, and you can see now we have 3 new tables. Our users table, and here's the default structure, but you can modify this however you want. Your password resets table, and then your migrations table that simply keeps track of all the migrations that have been executed. Because, as it turns out, yes, you can run migrations forward, but you can also roll them back. So this means undo the last migration that you ran. So now you can see it rolled all of them back. We give it a refresh, and now it's gone. Let's run it again. PHP Artisan migrate, and now it's back. So let's say you're running this and you realize, well, let's give it a refresh. Right here for users, we have this field called name, but maybe we've decided we want that to be username instead of name. Okay, we're going to go into our database folder, migrations, and this is where all of your migrations are stored. Here's the one that's included out of the box. So notice it's a general PHP class where we define the schema through an API that Laravel provides. So we need a string column for name, a string column for email, but this should be unique, so we're going to add the necessary constraint. We need a timestamp for when the email was verified, and then we need a string for the password, some remember tokens, and some timestamps. So we've decided we actually want that column to be named username. So I'm going to update that, and I have 2 choices now. I can run PHP Artisan migrate rollback, so undo the last migration you ran, and then redo it. That would work. So if I come back to SQL Pro, we give this a refresh. Now you can see that column is username. And yes, of course you can change this on the fly, but the point is by doing it through a class, we can easily reproduce a database structure through a single command. And if you're working on a big team, any person can pull in the code, they run that command, and they instantly have the same database structure. Now I noted there were 2 ways to do this. In addition to rollback and migrate, you also have a command called migrate fresh. Now what this does, take a look. It drops all of the tables. So of course, this is not something you ever run in production. You do this locally. It drops all of your tables and reruns them entirely from scratch. So now, once again, we'll still get the exact same thing. Now, if you ever forget these, don't forget, you can run PHP Artisan, scroll up, and you'll see here's all of the commands available to you. You've already learned install, rollback. Now, you'll see fresh and refresh. There's a slight difference between them, mostly due to legacy purposes. In general, though, I would just recommend stick with fresh, and you can ignore refresh entirely. Finally, reset would be the equivalent of rolling back every single migration you've ever run. In my experience, I don't reach for that too often. So in general, try to memorize migrate install, migrate rollback, and migrate fresh, and you should be good to go. So how about this? Together, let's create a brand new migration. All right, well, if we go up to our make namespace, remember all of these will generate some kind of file or some kind of class. So in our case, we want a new migration, so I will run make migration. Now, if you're ever wondering, well, I don't know what to pass here, here's a little tip. Before any command, add help. This will give you the details. All right, this command creates a new migration file. Here's how we use it. We run PHP Artisan make migration. We provide the name of the migration as well as any potential options, and we can refer to those here. Okay. Let's run it together. PHP Artisan, make me a migration to create a projects table. All right, so it created this file. We will now find that within the migrations directory, like so. Okay, so notice schema create. This is describing that we want to create a new table. Now, often you will want to update an existing table. In those cases, you would do schema table, and you'll get that by default if Laravel does not find this keyword here. It's a bit of a shortcut. It found that string and it's thinking, okay, you probably want to generate a new table, so I'll whip up the necessary boilerplate. Okay, so we want an auto-incrementing ID. We want timestamps. This is created at and updated at timestamps. In general, and when in doubt, I would say keep these. That way, if any change is made to a project or a user or a task or a subscription, you have timestamps to record exactly when those operations took place. Anyways, if you have maybe a project, whether it's something like a Basecamp or maybe you're making your own little helpful to-do app, it doesn't matter. Let's say for any given project, we do need a description. So we could use string, but if we're expecting a number of paragraphs, we should use a text column instead. We'll call it description. And we probably need a title for the project as well. That can be a string. Okay, let's keep it like that for now. Any given project consists of a title and a description. Now, you'll see that for any migration, you have an up method and a down method. This is what allows us to run migrate rollback. Think of it like this. When you run migrate, it's going to run the up method. When you instead run migrate rollback, it's going to undo whatever took place here. And in order to do that, you have to represent what it means to undo this operation. So in this case, we're creating a projects table. So to undo it, we just drop the projects table. Does that make sense? Now, a quick little note though, I think you'll find that many developers aren't a big fan of using the down method. They find some inconsistencies in it. So it really just depends upon what your desire is. Maybe if you're working on a team that already has a system in place, just have a conversation about that. I'll show you the two options here. Let's go ahead and migrate the database. So PHP Artisan migrate. And now, if I give this a refresh, you'll see that we do have a new projects table. Neat. However, let's roll that back. So we'll undo the last migration we ran. Okay, so now we give it a refresh and the projects table is gone. However, let's run it one more time, bring it back. Okay, there it is. However, this time we're going to comment this out. Well, now what exactly will happen? Well, PHP Artisan migrate rollback, and it executed it and it called this method, but if we give it a refresh, it's still there. And that's because, once again, you didn't define what it means to roll back this migration class. So how do we deal with this? If some people only like to move forward and they don't like to define the reverse operation, how do they get around this? Well, what they do is if they make a change and there was an error, they will either create a brand new migration class that fixes the error, or they will make their change and then they will run migrate fresh. Remember, for migrate fresh, it doesn't run the down method at all. It just drops the table entirely and then runs the up method for every migration class you have. So take a look. There we go. Now we dropped all the tables and we whipped up everything from scratch. So I know it might be a little tricky at first if you're not familiar with this idea. A lot of new concepts, migrations, and rolling them back and executing them in your environment file. If you need to, give this video a second watch because this is very important stuff. Anyways, now that we have a projects table, you're probably thinking, well, how do I access it? How do I insert information into that table? And more importantly, how do I query information and records from that table? Well, I'll show you how in the next episode.